Okay, next in the series of flies for the bokal is a dry fly, and this is a simple clink that I really like, and it works all the way from the beginning to the end of the season. It's something that you can maybe suspend a small nymph underneath. I wouldn't try anything too heavy though, but it will work during a flying ant hatch as well as in the middle of the day. So I'm tying this one in size 14. I reckon that's a pretty good all-round size, but you can go size 16 as well. I'm going to use 6/0 thread for this. You can go thinner if you like. So this is a Danville 6/0 unwaxed. And I'm just going to start my thread here. Then I'm going to take some very fine silver wire. It isn't strictly necessary, but it'll help the fly hold together a little bit longer. Tie that in at the front there, and then, oh dear, then wrap your way back carefully. Now you have a couple of options here. I'm going to go with the simplest option, in that I'm just going to dub the body, but you can use black thread, or you can even go with a sort of almost ant-like pattern by dubbing like a ball of dubbing at the back. I'm making this in black because it seems to be the most effective. We tried a few different colors, including beautiful clinks tied with, like a nice tan biot body, that kind of thing. And honestly, just a black dubbing body ended up working the best. Try and keep the body fairly thin. It'll just help it remain buoyant for a bit longer. Dubbing tends to soak up water quite easily, so you don't ever want to use too much of it on a dry fly. Right, I wouldn't take your body any further than that for now, so let's call it 2/3 of the way up the shank. You're then going to cross wrap the copper wire, so in the opposite direction to the thread, or in this case silver wire. You want to keep the wire very fine because it's a dry fly and you don't want to add too much unnecessary weight. But what this does do is it adds some durability. You often find, especially if there are trout around, it's not such a big issue with yellows, but the little trout teeth tend to tear through dubbing, and even if the fly is still floating, you will often find the dubbing body just disappearing. So I find that using fine wire, or you can even use something like 7 or 8x tippet, that just helps to add a bit of durability to it. You don't even need to be able to see the segmentation. Okay, I'm back. The cat needed to eat or something. I don't know, it was demanding something, as they do. Anyway, so you've dubbed 2/3 of the body, quite sparsely, that body's skinny. Now you add a post, and the post I'm using today is a bright fluorescent orange. That is because it will be very visible to me. Later in the season I would probably go with something white as soon as the fish start being a little bit more picky. Yeah, you'll just have to judge for yourself. Ask before you go how spooky the fish are being. But for the main part of the season, this orange post will be just fine and it'll be very visible to you. In this case I'm using a fluorescent, what's it called? It's it's like, there we go, fluorescent fire orange egg yarn, because that's what I could get in this color. Ideally you would use something like a fine polyprop yarn or poly yarn, whatever it's called, but finding good quality poly yarn is an absolute pain. So I just use what I can get, and in this case it's egg yarn, it's quite often antron. You want to make sure you lay enough of a foundation of thread around this post that it doesn't spin, because it's quite easy for posts to move around the hook shank, and that can be very annoying when tying, and it can also make your flies not very durable. So just make sure you do a few wraps of thread around the base, just so it has some support from the sides. Now, even though I'm going with a black clink, what I've found is that using black hackle and black CDC isn't such a great idea on the bokong. And I think the main reason for this is that when the fish are looking at black surface flies, it's almost always ants. And the ants have more sort of speckled brown legs rather than black, and certainly the wings are not black. So I prefer to use a grizzly hackle. Now, in terms of judging the length of your hackle, you want the hackle tips to be perfectly in line with the end of the bend of your hook over there. So as you can see here, this hackle is pretty much perfect actually, so I'm going to pluck this one. Now I'm going to strip some fibers off the base, just enough to tie on up the post. I'll tie that in at the bottom, and you want to tie it in with the concave part facing the post, so you've got the shiny side or the convex side facing you, because that means as soon as you wrap it, you've got the hackle fibers curving upwards, and that means that they are not going to catch themselves while you are wrapping. So you want to tie that all the way up to the top of the post, like so. Then you're going to use some dubbing for the thorax. You can use just the same dubbing you used for the body, or you can use some UV black spectra dubbing, or some peacock dubbing, something like that. I'm going to use I think it's called, it's Hairline Iced Up Midnight Haze in this case. Because I quite like this sort of purple UV touch it gives, especially for more aggressive fish. Right, now you've done the thorax dubbing. Now you're going to take the hackle and wrap it carefully down your post. Let's call it 4 wraps. And I'm just going to do 3 wraps of thread to tie it in. you can see there's actually a little bit of a gap underneath the hackle, and we do want that still, because I'm now going to add some CDC underneath, because this just gives it so much more movement, it gives it more buoyancy as well. Man, CDC is a wonder material, really. So today I'm using some Marc Petitjean Bistre CDC, but I mean really any kind of natural CDC will do. I just use a bulldog clip to grab one side of the feather, and then you cut it off the stem. So you can see I've got some CDC, this clip. Now you take your thread, you can either split your thread or you can do a dubbing loop. I split my thread, so I run my nails down it a couple of times, and then I just split it with one nail. You can kind of see that. And then using the clip, place it in the thread and carefully release the clip. And now I'm just going to spin my bobbin holder, and this effectively makes a brush of CDC. I've got quite a lot of CDC on this fly. It's actually probably way more than enough. You can play around with the quantities. You'll just have to decide for yourself how much the right amount is according to the CDC you buy. So in this case, because I got high quality Marc Petitjean CDC, one side of one feather is actually quite a lot of CDC. So anyway, now I've wrapped it under there. You'll notice I was pulling it up with each wrap. There'll still maybe be a few fibers sticking down. I'll just pull them up, do one complete wrap of thread underneath them. Now I'm going to take a black marker and cheat, and I'm just going to blacken this bit of thread here. And then just bring it to the hook eye like this. I promise you, you'll never see that. Then I'm just going to take a little bit of, well, I'm first going to blacken a little bit more of this thread here. This isn't strictly necessary, it's just to make the fly look good to you, because if the fly looks good to you, you'll probably fish it with more confidence and catch more fish. I'm just going to take a little bit of super glue, because who does whip finishes these days, really? And just do a couple of wraps with some super glue on the thread, and that holds it very, very securely. Trim your thread, move your CDC out the way, and carefully grab your post. Trying to grab as little CDC as possible. You can also trim the post before doing the CDC, and that can help. And cut it off fairly short. Now you can either leave the CDC very long like this, that'll give the fly a very big footprint, and I like doing that sort of thing for the Cape streams, but what I would do for the bokong is just shorten your CDC slightly. So I'm going to come from underneath with my fingers, stroke it and pinch it up, and then, let me see if I can do this in front of the camera. Just hold it tightly and use your nail just to pinch off these tips and shorten them a bit. Now you can cut them with scissors, and I do sometimes, but you get a better effect if you pinch them, because then they're not all exactly the same length and it just looks a little bit more natural. And you can just stroke it a bit, and yeah,